Hello, my name is Casey Duree. I'm a lieutenant with Albuquerque Fire Rescue.
Hi, my name is Carmen Martinez-Tittmann, and I'm an independently licensed behavioral health provider, and I spent about 4 years working with firefighters.
A big thing and a big subject that's on all of our mind is PTSD and depression and factors that challenge firemen throughout their careers. So the first question I'm going to talk to you about, how do you think a firefighter can notice with oneself that there's a problem with PTSD or depression?
That's a great question, Casey. And first of all, I would just like to thank you and thank AFR for creating this forum to address these really important issues for firefighters. I think it's just crucial that these issues be talked about and paid attention to. So the question is a good one, and the most important thing is that firefighters pay attention to what's going on with them. So depression and PTSD gives the body and the mind a lot of signals. Symptoms such as a change of sleep patterns or suddenly being more startled, whereas before that wasn't necessarily a problem, or feeling excessively irritable, or feeling sad, or sleeping more, or sleeping less, or changes in appetite. So basically what you're looking for are changes, right? Like changes from previous baseline functioning. And, having worked with firefighters, one of the things that I think I can say fairly honestly is that firefighters tend to have certain characteristics of stoicism, of incredible hard work and getting the job done. But sometimes they put their own health on the back burner, and sometimes they tend not to pay attention to what's going on with themselves and kind of push through a situation, right, to get the job done. Some of these characteristics are really helpful in the job that they have to do. And where health is concerned, sometimes you have to really pay attention, slow down, and notice little tiny nuances that your body is giving you, signals, something's not right. Before it gets to the place where you're having heart palpitations or panic attacks, usually there's some signals before that comes. Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is that firefighters have to pay attention to what's going on with themselves. Does that answer the question? Was there another part to it?
Yeah, I think that answers it.
Yeah.
Answers it very well. I can definitely relate to that. I know, and I've discussed this with you. I know in the past, I think I was about 8 years into my career when I noticed some big changes within myself, and it all happened when I was at a busy station. I was on shift and I started kind of just not feeling well within myself. So maybe those are the changes you're talking about. And then I started thinking like, man, am I good? Am I all there? I started having just weird bouts of, I guess you can call it anxiety, where I had trouble concentrating. I had trouble sleeping. My eating was horrible. I was still working out and doing things that I've always loved that have helped me, but I don't know. I was feeling a mess, and I actually made a bunch of appointments with cardiologists, neurology. I had endoscopies done, because I thought I was having GI issues. I was a mess, and everyone was telling me, "Oh, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine." And I started seeking counseling. About that time is I think when the MBSR stuff started happening. And through that, with the meditation and then kind of increasing, my magnesium and sleep and stuff, it kind of helped. And also, this kind of brings me into like the thought of like what types of people, seek this profession. Do you think, people that have had previous traumas, or do they relate to specific things within the job? Is that why they choose this job? And due to the fact that they had previous traumas in their life, maybe this job is like an outlet, and then something will kind of come out of the woodwork eventually. What are your thoughts on that?
This is a question that I became really fascinated with when I worked with firefighters for 4 years. Like, what would make a person want to go into firefighting? Because in some ways, it's a really brutal profession. It's brutal on your sleep patterns, on your physical health, and in some ways, your behavioral health. So I think what I can say about that is that my hunch is that if you did a survey of firefighters and you asked them about their history, their childhood, if they were to be honest, that you would find a large percentage of at least exposure to trauma, if not what we call ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences of different kinds, right? And that's not a source of shame, but what it should be is a source of awareness, because what trauma history does is it leaves the nervous system compromised and vulnerable. And so if you take an already vulnerable nervous system and then you expose layers of trauma on top of that already vulnerable nervous system, eventually that nervous system is going to scream for attention, right? It's either going to collapse into some kind of physical health condition or manifest into some kind of behavioral health condition. And we can't say, like a formula, exactly this is going to happen or for how long, because it's different with different people. But I think the implications are, again, awareness. And this is one of the ideas that I had when we were working with Mind, Body, Fire, which is based on Jon Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction, is that we had the advantage and the privilege of working with cadets for quite a while. And, to have some kind of action plan for cadets as they come into the fire service, so that they have to go through and kind of map their life and pinpoint and target their adverse childhood experiences or any kind of previous trauma that might leave them vulnerable to trauma exposure now, I think would be really helpful, because the key is raising awareness. And you don't, raise awareness, especially now you're letting in 18, 19-year-olds, unless it's kind of in the system and it's structured and it's also part of the culture. Yeah. So this has been also an issue for firefighters, is that these kinds of things have been difficult to talk about. But I think things are changing, and they're changing within AFR. There's some really wonderful things happening here. And so if from day one, when the cadets come in, we start talking about, hey, what do you think about trauma? What is it? How's it played out in your life? So that you sort of begin to diffuse the power of this word even, so that people can develop kind of a personalized, individualized map for themselves, and then begin to understand their own personal resilience, because it's different for everybody, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a great point you made. Because it's going to happen. Right. Trauma is going to happen regardless if it happened in your previous, life prior to being a fireman or not. You're gonna be involved. You're gonna see something. You're gonna experience something, and it's gonna affect you in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to follow up with just saying this is why, the work of the IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters, has been so important around making the distinctions between trauma exposure, traumatic injury, and then traumatic disorder. So, all firefighters are going to be exposed to trauma. Many firefighters are going to develop an injury related to that exposure. And then a smaller percentage of firefighters are going to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. But this is a really healthy, I think, way of thinking about it, because it also connects the fact that the traumatic exposure, is what's causing these symptoms. Something's not wrong with you. It's what is happening to you, right? Yeah. And so it's job related. And in that sense, there are things that you can do to mitigate damage.
Do you think that some firefighters are more susceptible to some of these things due to, more PTSD, depression, if there's hormonal changes within oneself, or even like inherited traits? I get it. It's kind of a broad question, but getting into the fire services, can we predict or see, which firefighter is going to basically be affected by this because of specific things, or is this kind of like?
I think that is a broad question, and I think we would want to look at data for the specific answers to that. I do think that, we know based on data that ACEs set you up for nervous system vulnerability and the potential for compromise. So if you've had ACEs in your history, that exposure to trauma is going to affect you. And for some reason, some people are just more resilient than others. It has to do with constitutional factors. It has to do with upbringing. It has to do with genetics. Who knows? Resilience is a huge field and area of study that is hugely interesting and fascinating and totally salient and meaningful to firefighters. But, we don't really totally know, although there is a huge body of data about resilience, what exactly makes somebody more resilient than others. But I think the important piece of this is that it's incumbent upon each firefighter to understand their own constitution, right? It's like when I was working with firefighters, one of the things I used to say and joke about is I would last probably less than 24 hours in this profession. I don't think I could not do it. I could not because.
Are you talking about socially? Like in the social?
No, I'm talking about just the tasks,
the
tasks of, women tend to have more kinds of sleep issues than men because of hormones and things like that. But the sleep deprivation alone would just send me running to the hills, Yeah. So I think, again, the important piece of this is self-awareness and understanding. Really developing, as kooky as this sounds, you have to develop a relationship with your own nervous system, your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system, because it's also inevitable that firefighters have to move into sympathetic, right? Yes. You have to do that in order to do your jobs. So how do you unpack? How do you reset? And different things work for different people. So again, it's like every firefighter has to begin to be curious about, how do I tick? What works for me? Meditation doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a lot of people, But the science is in on these kinds of modalities like meditation, yoga, body relaxation, that it does access and promote functioning of the parasympathetic and shifting you into a place of rest and digestion, which is the task of the body, is to digest both physically and emotional experiences, right?
Exactly. And that actually goes into my next question, as far as what types of things can we do? And you kind of answered it, to alleviate these stressors that will eventually lead to depression, PTSD, things like that. I mean, you talked about the meditation. And is there any other types of natural medicinal stuff, or is there specific medicational treatments? Or is there, therapies that, one can access? What are your thoughts, and what are the best routes for that? I know you don't know all the different routes that we have to take, but, if something's a little bit more extreme for one individual, if, like you said, meditation doesn't work, or if trying to, increase vitamin supplementation or, sleep or whatever, if it doesn't work, what are the next steps?
Well, I think the most important step is prevention.
Yes.
And this is doable, right? Like you cannot necessarily completely avoid, say, firefighter suicide. But what you can do is begin to target depression. Yeah. That is the prerequisite for this kind of suicide. So you want to prevent, and you prevent through self-care. And in order to implement self-care regimens, you have to be aware, and you have to commit, and you have to have the same kind of discipline. Firefighters are incredibly disciplined people. As you guys couldn't get through the academy alone and then do what you do and do it on no sleep and everything else. So that same kind of discipline that you apply in your field, in your profession, you need to apply to yourself and your own self-care. So setting up, like I said, before these symptoms happen, some system of self-care. Now, once you experience symptoms, your body is now screaming. You haven't listened to the whispers, so your body's having to scream. And now you're probably going to require some more intervention. Yeah. Counseling, sometimes medication helps. Trauma-informed kinds of counseling modalities are important for firefighters, important for anybody who's experiencing trauma. So what that means is that it's a shift from, what's wrong with you to what is happening to you, right? So there's several different kinds. Medications sometimes help. Trying to get your sleep back regulated is really important, really difficult for firefighters. Nutrition is huge. Awareness of alcohol use, risky drinking, vitamin B, the B12s, all the vitamin Bs are huge for stress, stress depletion. And then these kinds of addendum therapies or adjunct therapies like Reiki or massage, acupuncture, and then of course all of the systems of like yoga, meditation, and massage and body relaxation are very, very important for re-regulating, coming back to a place of regulation and accessing the parasympathetic nervous system. Working out is good. Firefighters tend to lean on working out, right?
It's the go-to,
It's the go-to, and there's nothing wrong with it. The important thing about accessing the parasympathetic nervous system is the breath. The breath is the communicator to the nervous system. So anything that accesses the breath, this is why yoga and meditation are so good, because the breath is key and primary.
So I know one of the big issues I always had coming off shift, and a lot of the guys can relate and gals can relate to this, is coming off shift, you transition from a 48-hour shift, and we're going home where we're going to have 4 days off. My wife's biggest gripe always was just I come in the house, and I don't know if it's because I was on shift for 48 hours. And this is regardless if it's a busy cycle or if it's not. My mentation and my demeanor is always just really awkward and rough. And the transition from the fire station to the house, it's always a weird transition. And I've been doing this for, almost 15 years now, and it hasn't gotten any easier. I mean, I'm always trying to work on it. I'm trying to do things. And I mean, it's gotten to the point where I'll pull up to the front of my house. It's in the morning. I'll have to sit in my truck, probably about 5-10 minutes and just kind of breathe and think about, what's going to happen. Okay, everything's going to be good. I'm going to walk in there. I'm going to say hi to my kids. And I don't know if other firemen, deal with the same thing or try to talk to themselves. I mean, whatever. I just try to kind of get ready to transition back into the real world, And and with that, do you think that there's anything that, any tips or anything you can give to the guys as far as like changes that they can make or things that they can do basically to transitioning back to home life, or changes they can make maybe within their life, that quick little changes or little like little breathing exercises, or I don't know, anything,
Well, you just expressed it beautifully. And I think, again, the first step is awareness and acknowledgement. Like you noticed, right?
Yes.
And you have acknowledged that this is a difficult transition. And you are not the only person or the first firefighter that I've heard talk about this. In our work with Mind, Body, Fire, firefighters talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
And how, the first day, it was almost like they were coming back into themselves and figuring out their life and transitioning, right? But what makes it hard is the wives and the kids want their husband and their daddy like that. And so, realistically, probably exactly what you're doing is just perfect, Casey, in terms of like taking 10 to 15 to 20 minutes to try to reset, try to acknowledge whatever kind of little ritual you figure out for yourself. You did a great thing of just breathing and talking to yourself and saying, like, now I'm going into the house, I'm going to be a dad and a husband. That's a great thing, So whatever firefighters can figure out for themselves, a little transition ritual, once you give yourself the permission and to acknowledge that and that's important, I think everybody can come up with their own creative way of doing it, But I think because, there's so much layered and so much involved there. Like, you don't want to come in and lay your experience on your spouse or partner, right? Because for different reasons, right? You got to get into the program of this other part of your life and yourself. And there's expectations there from, partners and children, they don't understand, and the kids aren't developmentally able to sort of digest everything nor should they have to, right? That dad or mom is gone through. So it's huge and it's layered. And, these are the little things that, like I thought I kind of understood what it was like to be, the firefighting profession because my son is a firefighter, but I really didn't until I started working with firefighters. I learned so much. And this is one thing that is really key. And I think doing what you're doing and designing that for yourself and giving yourself permission to do it is really a step towards health and wellness, right? It's little things. It's not huge things. It's a tiny thing like that.
Yeah. How do we know and how do we recognize signs and symptoms and, specific things within our other firefighters that we work with? I mean, is there things that, they'll display? Is there key points that like little triggers or anything like that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question because, as we know, firefighter suicide is a huge problem, right? And suicides don't just happen one day. Like, a person doesn't just wake up one day and say, today's the day that I am going to end my life. It is a cumulative series of things that at some point has been depression, severe and profound depression, right? So what you're looking for is changes in behavior, right? And suicide may not be totally preventable, but depression is, or at least it's addressable and treatable, right? So you're looking for changes in people's behavior. And so when you are at a station, you learn people pretty well, right? They're like your family, like these guys, right? And I think it's important to just know that it is important to do something. So depending on what you see in the person, if you see the person either withdrawing, whereas before they were sort of socially engaged, or if you see the person drinking more, like drinking is a big problem with firefighters, and you can kind of tell when people have been drinking excessively or if somebody's drinking on the job, or if you see people having a lot of trouble with regulation, meaning sort of keeping themselves under control, if they're suddenly kind of losing their temper or kind of losing it, or if they're sort of melting down and freaking out, or if they seem sad or withdrawn. These are all signs and symptoms of depression. If you notice that somebody who previously had a great appetite and would come, because firefighters eat communally, right? They eat together. So you guys learn each other's eating habits, right? So previously a person was eating heartily and enjoyed their meals, and all of a sudden they're not eating and they're locking themselves up in their room, or, they
kind of
seclusion, withdrawal, isolation. You're looking for a change in behavior. And then once you see that, what's important is to have the person, somebody who has a relationship with that person, reach out to them and just say, hey, we're concerned about you, just the way you would a friend, because these guys are, your brothers and sisters. And so does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I think it makes me think about one of the cadet classes that we had. It was he's actually the youngest cadet in the history of AFR. And he said, I really think that there needs to be specific people that really understand firefighters and firefighter culture that work with firefighters. So in terms of like counseling, right?
Yeah.
Because we were doing education around wellness, and we had our Mind Body Fire program at that time. And I said, well, there actually is. And he said, really? I didn't know about it. And that's MAPS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is our Members Assistance Program through our local 244. And the great thing about that, and I'm not dissing on the EAP program, the EAP program is great too, but the great thing about MAPS is that you've got people in there who know and understand firefighter culture.
And that's the big thing. If you need assistance with mental health and wellness, contact our Health and Wellness Officer, Lieutenant Miguel Tittmann, at 505-362-5614, or email mtittmann@cabq.gov. You can also access MAP, EAP, peer support, and other mental health resources available on Target Solutions. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe out there.